Hello everyone, and welcome to Chapter 17 of the STEM Challenge. In this chapter we're going to talk about the nervous system and the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the system that involves your hormones. Mostly we're going to talk about the the nervous system. So there are two sections, 17.1 and 17.2, that we'd like you to read and study. That's a stylized version of a nerve cell. Let's take a look at the objectives here. We're going to look at different types of neurons. Another name for a nerve cell is a neuron. How nerve impulses are transmitted down that nerve cell or neuron. We're going to look at different parts of the nervous system, the divisions and subdivisions. We're going to take a look at how drugs affect some of the nervous system. So here is a stylized version of a neuron or a nerve cell. You'll notice here's the nucleus to give you some bearing. Here's the body of the cell here. These are dendrites. At the end of these dendrites, they receive the signal from the last neuron, the last nerve cell that this was connected to. It will come in here, and then the signal will go into the axon. It will flow down the axon to the axon terminal and transmit that signal to the next nerve cell. They're all connected. And what is it that it's transmitting? It's hard to believe, but believe it or not, it's just electricity, regular, pure electricity. We'll talk about how much electricity a little later on in the slide presentations. So nerve cells, again, another name for them are the neurons, are composed of the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. So please make sure you read about that. There are types of nerve cells. There are sensory neurons. They carry the impulses from the tissue and organs into the spinal cord and up to the brain. There are motor neurons that go the other way. They carry impulses from the brain and the spinal cord down to the muscles and the glands. And the interneurons are the ones that are in between those. There is a wonderful YouTube channel by a young neuroscientist, and this one is called What is a Neuron? We'd like you to watch that. Nerve impulses, really important. Notice they say nerve impulses are electrical in nature. But how much electricity? I'd like you to think of a AA battery. So a AA battery has 1.5 volts. That amount of volts, is too big to be measured in the human body, but we do carry it in volts, but we carry it in millivolts. So imagine that we take 1 volt, we divide it by 1,000, and that's called 1 millivolt. It's millivolts that are the amount of electricity that flows through our nervous system. When there isn't a nerve impulse going through a particular part of the nervous system, that's called a resting potential. Here's a diagram of the cell membrane that you can see the resting potential of a neuron. And there are two ions that are super important with this, sodium and potassium. And there's an energy-rich molecule called ATP, which when it releases its energy turns into ADP. But resting potential, just know that resting potential means no impulse going down the neuron. Action potential is when an impulse goes down a neuron. So make sure you read about this. And on this particular video from Ali, What is Resting Potential, I'd like you to watch that. She's going to talk about the amount of electricity in that video. But if you look over here, membrane potential, notice that the measurement is in millivolts. So this is right down at about 80 millivolts, up to 40 millivolts, and this is the impulse going down the electron. Notice that there's a change in polarity. Polarity means positive and negative. Normally, inside the cell, it's negative. See this over here, mostly negative, but for a short period of time, when this action potential rolls down that neuron, it flips, and that's the impulse itself. So this is an action potential shown in a diagram. Here's another from Ali on the neurobiologist, the neuroscientist. I'd like you to take a look at that. This diagram shows the components of the central nervous system, which is the brain up here. Here's the back of the brain, and then we have the spinal cord. Lots of nerves coming off this. This is just a simple version, but this is the spinal cord, which is within your backbone. Your head contains the brain, your spinal cord within your backbone. So here is what's called the peripheral nervous system. All of these blue lines are nerves coming off the spinal cord. I'd like you to read about the parts of the brain. There's the cerebellum, the cerebrum, and the medulla. But here are the parts that we're going to use this diagram in the quiz. The frontal lobe is responsible for reasoning, thinking, critical thinking. The parietal lobe is touch. The temporal lobe is responsible for hearing. And the occipital lobe is responsible for sight. Now notice we're talking about how do we hear? How do we see things? Well, we have to take things in from the outside, whether it be sound waves in hearing, or whether it's light waves, or whether it's pressure in the sense of touch. So we'll take a look at those a little bit. Take a look at parts of the brain. They'll be explained here in this video animation. And the part of the nervous system that you control is called the somatic nervous system. So please read about this. The part that you don't control is called the autonomic nervous system. And we'll talk about, you don't think about it when you digest things. Your nervous system is either under your control or not under your control. We're going to talk a little bit about how the eye works, because we're taking sun energy, light energy in to the eyeball. It's then transmitted electrically through the optic nerve into the occipital lobe. So watch that short animation. Here's a diagram of looking down on the eye. Very, very important. This is how sound waves get in, and they're transferred into electrical signals as well. So look at this diagram. We have a short demonstration from Fun Science Demos, a channel that we produce here at Temple University, that will explain how sound waves are turned into first ripples in a liquid and then electricity. At this part, in this diagram from your textbook, just make sure you know the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. Drugs in the nervous system. There are a number of drugs that affect the nervous system, things like coffee, tea, cola, hot cocoa, dark chocolate candy, and the amount of caffeine that's in each of these. And caffeine is referred to as a psychoactive drug. There's disorders of the nervous system like vascular disorders or nervous tissue, spinal. Make sure you read about this. Allie will explain what an action potential is. She explained earlier what resting potential is. This is an animation on the action potential in neurons. It's very well done. I won't ask a ton of questions, but just know that the potassium-sodium pump is really, really important in creating that pulse, that action potential as it moves throughout your body. The endocrine system is talking about hormones and receptor targets. Make sure you read this. These are the major organ the major endocrine organs in your body: pineal, pituitary, thyroid. Make sure you read through this. And there's a wonderful animation by Emma Bryce here which talks about how do your hormones work. A lot of times we really are clueless about that. These are some hormones and what they work on, what their target cells are, and what their effects are. Make sure you read through that. I won't ask you specific questions on this, but you should have a general sense of hormones, what they are, what they do, and how they affect. This paragraph in your text talks about that. So in this, in this chapter, we'll also take a look at a really fascinating TED Talk about how the nervous system of a cockroach works. I think you'll find this interesting. This one is one of my students' favorites, which is how to control someone else's arm with your body. This is a wonderful, short 5-minute TED Talk, and I think you'll find it really interesting. He takes the electricity from this young woman as she transmits it down her brain and moves the arm of a volunteer, which you don't see in this diagram. This is the guy who invented the system. Take a look at that. Another thing that a discussion point we get into is a lot of people want to do more studying about the brain. Well, TED has some great playlists. One is called Fascinating TED Lessons About the Brain. I invite you to take a look at this that we've linked. And another playlist is Overcoming Depression. Depression is an illness that many, many people suffer from, and there are ways to soften the effects of depression. And this is a good playlist from TED, so we've linked that as well. All right, good luck. Please make sure you read the chapter carefully. Please make sure you take notes on it. Good luck on the quiz, and we'll see you soon.